Alright, so this is the second tutorial out of from the first tutorial that I actually made on starting virtual machines in VirtualBox. This is the second of the series, and we're kind of going to go over settings just in virtual machines, so you kind of have an idea of what you're doing when you're changing some of the settings. So let's go into the settings menu. Simply all you do is press the settings. It's the little gear icon right next to the new. So, of course, in the settings, you get the basics, which is the name, the type of operating system. The name is whatever you called it, by the way. And then you have Ubuntu, like whatever version. I have Ubuntu Linux on this one. And here's advanced. This is the spot where it's at, where you keep all the snapshots. And all that fun stuff. You actually don't need to know a lot of this right now. Most of this is advanced stuff, but this is the general tab. This is where everything can occur. There's even disk encryption, which could be essential for if you're wanting to keep even your VMs secure. Okay, what we really want to go over is this part. Right here, this is the systems. And the systems is very, very, very important. So this is what we have. When we start the system and we are using our operating system in the VM, what we want to do is make sure that we have the right amount of memory. This is the memory slider right here on the motherboard. So this is our system motherboard. If we were to have a computer of some kind, this is our motherboard. It's very customizable. It's pretty nice, actually, having all the things in here, but you are limited to some hardware. Like, for example, whatever wireless card you have is what you're going to be using inside of your VM. There's no going around it. It's seriously what you have. So there are some limitations, but for the most part, you're limited by your hardware. So you can run as many virtual machines as you'd like, as long as it doesn't cap out. As you can see, this little bar right here is telling us once I start hitting that 12 gig limit on my computer, I'm going to start maxing out because I have about 12 gigs. But the standard that I've always used, and I said in my last video, was 2 gigs. 2 gigs is what I feel is appropriate as the bare minimum to run a lot of operating systems such as Mac or Windows. Linux is kind of lenient. And there are some versions of Linux where you could probably just run it off of 1 gig and still get efficient results. I'm really thinking of like Ubuntu server, where it's just a terminal and you're not having to work with a GUI or anything else. But even then, it can get kind of tedious. So you definitely want to keep a decent amount of RAM. Here's the boot order. So you can actually change the boot order. You're not using any floppy. I would guess, but that's the default. This is all defaults. The optical usually you want to keep here because let's say that you are running, you need to run the ISO file, or you have a important disk file such as guest editions. You would put that in the optical spot, which is in the storage over here. You see the optical, and then there's the drive. See, there's no floppy in here. But let's go back to system. And then you can also change the chipset, which isn't too necessary. You could honestly be fine with just this, unless you get some sort of chipset error, and that way you may want to change that. Honestly, USB tablet, that's interesting. That's new to me, actually. But for the most part, that's the important part, is the boot order and the memory. This memory is very important. This is seriously why a lot of issues happen when you're running virtual machines, is you run out of memory or your computer cannot take what is going on. For example, I was running a Minecraft server in the background of my computer, and it was running at 2 gigs, and something was going on in the middle of the game, and that was this is on like a 8 gig laptop that I'm talking about. And it was sapping a lot of the RAM that was already being sapped from the operating system, which was being sapped by another thing that I had open, and the virtual machine was dying. I was trying to do work while having all these tabs open, which is never a good idea. and all these different softwares open. So it's best that you keep your load down and try to make sure that you have the amount of RAM that is optimal for your virtual machine. Now, here's where things get a little interesting. Processing power is very important, except you also have to realize that you're limited by how many cores are in your processor. So for example, and VirtualBox does a great job on telling you how much you actually need for your VM to run efficiently. Honestly, you kind of, cross the line when you get into this right here. I have 8 cores on my processor, when in reality, I only need, up to 4 cores. I've done fine with running Ubuntu at 1 core. But if you needed more processing power for some reason, this would be the spot you would go to, is go to the processor tab underneath the system, and you would just up this as much as you can. Again, your processor is probably limited on what you have. My computer actually is not one of the best out there, but it still gets the job done. But this simple, for me personally, I would have put it to 2 cores or a single core. But as of now, 1 core has been working fine for me. This is Ubuntu, so I'm not really having any issues. But that's honestly perfectly fine for me. But if you guys run into any processing issues, if your VM is slow and you've upped the RAM a ton, this is the second thing that you should probably try out, is upping the amount of cores that you have. So this is one other thing that I know a little bit about. I wouldn't necessarily trust me 100%, but para-virtualization, and you can see it right here, selects the para-virtualization guest interface provider to be used by this virtual machine. And HyperV is something that's actually built into Windows. You can enable HyperV inside of it, and it helps with the virtualization process. You don't have to worry too much about this for the most part. VirtualBox does a good job on getting the default set up. So, okay, and here's the other thing. This isn't really too much of an issue if you're not using a heavy graphics-based something of some sort. Windows and Ubuntu, if you're playing a game inside of your virtual machine, this is where things may get a little, you may want to just start your video memory and just start throwing it up there. I'm only using 16 megabytes of video RAM, which isn't bad. It's honestly just as good if you're just browsing the web. But if you needed, in any case, to up that, you do this right here. Also, if you have multi-screens, which honestly is not needed, but if you wanted multiple monitors, or you have multiple monitors, you can up this. And as you can see, the video memory adjusts as need be. But that's really all you need to know about that. Yeah, pretty much. Now the storage is here's where things get kind of interesting. You actually do need to know how to use the storage. The storage, just like I've said before, if I were starting a VM, I would want to choose some sort of disk, or get a disk and pop it in there. That's where guest editions is actually put in, if you put in guest editions. This is all important stuff. You can actually add different ports to your hard drive as well. Look, if you have an NVMe, PCIe, you can actually get that. And you can select another hard drive and you act as if it's in an NVMe slot, which is pretty cool. So I'm actually going to remove that controller because I don't really need that. But let's say you were going to act as if it's a floppy. You could actually make something a floppy on here. And it's pretty interesting. You can do a lot of things with this. But again, you just add like a USB. You could add a USB here, and you choose one of them to be the USB. You can choose an ISO to be here, as if you're booting off of a USB. It works perfectly fine either way. So you can add an interface to your storage system. In fact, I'm not sure. Yeah, so it won't let you add any others over here. I was expecting to add another SATA connection, but you don't have to worry too much about that. For now, just know that this is where you would want, it's like your disk. It's where you put your disk into your computer, and this is your hard drive right here. You can see all the information on that, all that important stuff. So other than that, that's all we needed. Now let's go over to network. Now this is very important. There are plenty of videos out on the internet to understand this. I skipped the audio section, by the way. It's not really that important. It's just audio. But the network portion is really important. All I'm going to say is to understand the bridged adapter and the NAT. So the NAT is kind of like a virtual switch. I wish I could explain this in a better way, but if you were to have a switch, an actual, like an Ethernet switch, if you had a series of Ethernet ports on the side of a switch, your computer acts as a switch for the virtual machine. So you're not actually using the internet connection directly to the router. You're just using the connection through a NAT. See, if you actually hover over this, I don't know if it actually will say anything. No, but it's just NAT. So you're using NAT. And I can still connect to the internet, and it's perfectly fine. I do want to note that you also can add 4 adapters, which is pretty cool. But the important thing is to know that the bridged adapter will actually bridge you to directly to your actual computer's hardware or your wireless card. So that's the way that the bridged adapter works, is it connects directly to it rather than getting the internet directly to the software side, if that makes sense. There's a lot of things here that there are other options, but there's tons of videos on explaining that, and I don't feel it necessary to explain it right now. Internal network, for example, you can connect internally VirtualBox machines or VMs. You can connect them internally, having an internal network. A NAT network, you can have them connected internally there. But it's really cool. There's a lot of things that you can do on here. I'm not going to get into serial ports, shared files. The user interface is just, the stuff that you see when you get into the VirtualBox. So it's not too much of an issue. But this is kind of interesting. This is the USBs. You can actually add USBs to the thing. For example, I have a Logitech camera. I could throw my Logitech camera onto here, and I have Corsair products as well that I could throw into here, and my Snowball mic and everything else. And this would all be in the USB device filters, and this would actually cut out the filters, or cut out these devices via the filter, which we don't want, by the way. Most of the time you just want to keep those if you're not working in some sort of environment, professional environment. So that's really all that I have on the settings for VirtualBox. If you have any other questions, leave them down in the comments below. I know that I'm trying my best to give some insight in some of the VirtualBox, the usage of VirtualBox and how is the best way to use it. Those are the only things that you really need to know. The past 2 videos that I've made, so the last video and this video, are essential to figuring out how to use VirtualBox in the simplest way. If you have any other questions about it, it's best to go onto the internet or forums and check that out. Or you can leave, again, if you have any questions in the comments, and I can help you out there. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and have a great one.